How do you get through a challenging time? I mean, the kind where your world is rocked by a tragic diagnosis, a marital betrayal, the loss of a loved one, or just anything that just rocks your world on a deep emotional level. How do you manage fear, anxiety, stress, sadness while still trying to just maintain life? You got to keep living, you got to keep getting up every morning and living and earning a living and taking care of your family and taking care of responsibilities. 3 months ago, from the time of this recording, my dad went into the ER and then into hospice and then went to meet Jesus face to face, all within a 5 week period. So today I'm talking about peace and giving yourself and others grace when you're going through a severely challenging time. And it's not all sad and somber because I'm going to share some of the truly special ways that God showed up in what I like to call God hugs during this challenging time that my family and I faced together. Hey there, my friend. Jenna Dexter here, certified Christian life and mindset coach for women. And this is Total Thrive. This is where you are empowered to achieve a thriving and purpose filled life. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how can you talk about thriving, Jenna, when you're about to talk about your dad dying? Well, it's because of the peace that passes understanding that only Jesus can give. It's because the word says to rejoice in the Lord always, that even in the midst of our most difficult valleys, he is with us. And there is a sense of thriving and flourishing in just knowing that the creator of the universe has got you and is walking with you through that. And that on the other side of this life, it is glorious. And this is all just getting us ultimately where we're all going to be, because we're all going to be up in heaven with my daddy, celebrating and worshiping Jesus together. So, if you listen to my last episode where I talked about how I had gotten burned out and how God had led me into this place of resting in Him and learning His ways, which are easy and pleasing, what He knew and I didn't know at that time is that my dad was going to get sick. And I mentioned that in the podcast that my dad got sick, and that's all I said. Well, in reality, he had been sick for many years. He had been diagnosed with prostate cancer in, I believe, 2011. So many years, this has been an underlying condition he's had. It sounds kind of funny to call cancer a condition, but it was something that I very much remember him sitting us all down on, I think it was an Easter at my sister's house. We were all celebrating together as a family. And after we had eaten and had some family time, my dad gathered us all around to let us know that he had gotten this diagnosis. And I just very strongly remember him telling us all, I don't know how long I've got, but I'm not afraid to go see Jesus. I've lived a good long life. And I can't tell you how many times he's said that ever since then and repeated that, and how we have the best family. And he recounts his time serving the Lord. It's the big highlight of his life is his wife, my mom, and Jesus, and serving Jesus, and his years of doing prison ministry and traveling. And um, he was a pastor and he was an evangelist, and he was called to be an evangelist, truly called to be an evangelist. He'll talk to anybody about Jesus anytime, anywhere. And but he and my mom and us as a family, when I was younger, did prison chapel services where he would do the preaching. My mom and my brother and I, if my brother was with us, we'd do the music, and my dad would do the preaching. And the first time we did that at Oklahoma State Penitentiary when I was about, I think, 11 or 12. And a few guys got saved and they were hooked, and that was it for them. This was their thing. So they did prison ministry up until COVID, basically. Their whole life, they were somehow involved, even as they got older and it got harder for them to carry the music equipment and travel. They would at least go every once in a while to a prison in Arizona, um, and do prison ministry and serve and do what they felt called to do. And it wasn't until about 4 years ago that the doctors finally said that the cancer was now in the bones. Up until then, he was doing pretty well. I mean, they're doing the PSA levels and they're getting him on whatever drug to lower the PSA levels, and if you know anything about all of that, then you understand what I'm talking about, but he was doing okay. He would go in and out of feeling better or worse, but for the most part, he was doing okay physically, and he's not a complainer, and so even if it was bad, he probably wouldn't have told us to that degree, but it was about 4 years ago that finally they were saying that it was in the bone, and that was like, "Oh, that sounds so scary," and, "Oh, it sounds like it must be, we're getting near the end now," and but he just kept going, and they weren't saying, "Hey, go do chemo. Hey, this is how long you have." Nobody was saying those kinds of things, and he just kept living life, and it wasn't until about 4 or 5 months ago that he started complaining about his back aching, and knowing that that probably meant the cancer was taking its toll in his back, and so that started to increase until about 3 months ago he got out of bed and just collapsed. His legs just went out from underneath him, and he just could not get himself up at all. So he ended up in the ER, and long story short, my mom and my sister ended up at his doctor's office talking to him about what was going on with my dad, and he said, "Well, I've been expecting this for 4 years." And, that was, of course, when the cancer had gone into his bones. So from that point on, just like I was thinking, like, when they say the cancer has gone into the bone, I know that's bad, right? And so I was worried that how long do we have? But it just kept going, right? I truly believe that God gave us all an extra 4 years with him. That God, it was less about for my dad than it was for all of the rest of us. And because he was ready to go anytime. But my mom got another 4 years with him, and when I think about where my life was at 4 years ago and where my daughter's life was at 4 years ago and my sister's life and many of us who needed him still at that time, and just moments that we had with him during seasons that he needed to still be here, and he was here, and God gave him to us for more time, and I think that we were all in a better place. No one wants to lose anyone ever, but I think that all of us are in a much better place now to handle it than we would have been 4 years ago. So that was God hug number 1. I believe God gave us an extra 4 years with my dad. So at that point, when he fell, from that point on for the next 5 weeks is when, my life took a huge turn. I had just taken a big leap of faith with my business slash ministry, and in my mind, it was a horrible time for suddenly this shift, and suddenly I'm going to visit. I live about 6 hours away. I'm in Monterey, California. They are in Southern California. And so it was, it's a pretty decent drive to go down there and stay and so I ended up taking, at least 3 trips down there. On my first trip down to Southern California to visit when he was staying in the temporary care facility, I really felt God highlighting the word grace to me. He actually already had given me the word grace. I kept feeling this word grace. But on the way down there, I saw this license plate on the truck right in front of me that had not 1, 2, or 3, but 4 fives in a row. It had some letters, and then it was 5555. I thought, wow, it's like you see license plates that have 3 digits, double digits or triple digits fairly commonly. But it's not very often you see 4 digits repeated, right? And so it just really stood out to me because I know that 5 can represent grace. And so it's like, wow, I was already feeling like God was speaking the word grace, and now there's the 4 fives, but I don't know. I try not to get too overly, "Ooh, God just said this thing," but I watched for it. I'm like, "Okay, God, I'm watching. We'll see if you show me anything else." Well, literally about, I don't know, maybe an hour later, 45 minutes or an hour later on the freeway. The previous, by the way, had been on a white pickup truck. Now a different white pickup truck goes by, also with 5555. on the back. And I hadn't really been noticing any of the other license plates. I just happened to notice the one, and I happened to look over right as this white truck was passing me, and I see the 4 fives on there, and I was just laughed, and thank you, God. And so, for me, grace, it applies in multiple ways. I mean, I just looked up yesterday the definition of grace, and there's like 7 definitions for it because it can mean so many different things. But for me, in that situation, it represented 2 main things. One was all about having grace with each other, you're the family members and everybody that's going through this, and the emotions that are rising, and all of it. Just have grace with each other. Just have grace. Just have grace. Number 2, and for me, even more significant, was the idea of having grace on myself, that God's got me and my business and my personal life and my responsibilities and my income and my provision, because if I'm not working, how are the bills gonna get paid? How is that gonna happen, Lord? If I'm, who knows what's gonna happen with my dad right now, and how long this is gonna be. There was already a plan in place to where my brother and my sister and I were all gonna be taking turns, and I was gonna go for maybe 1 week a month. My brother was gonna go for 1 week a month. My sister was gonna go for a couple weeks a month because she's coming from farther away, and if she's gonna come, she wants to stay longer, and then, um and we kinda had the system in place, and I'm like, "I don't know how long this is gonna go. I don't We just don't know." It's an unknown future of all these things and how it's gonna impact my personal life, my business life, my ministry, my just all the things, right? So, it was grace on that. It was, "Grace, Jenna, I got you." I had just gone through the whole burnout, "No, Jenna, I never told you to push yourself that hard. Rest and trust me that I got you." I'd just gone through that whole thing and was still living in that. And so now this was kind of an extension of that. It was like rest into just grace, that I've got you, that my grace is sufficient for you. You have enough time. You have enough provision. You have enough of anything that you need. There is enough. So just rest in me and let me carry you through this time. So that was God hug number 2. And so, I'd come back home. I think I was home for, I don't know, a couple of weeks or something, when I was planning to go back already on a Sunday. And I got the call from my mom on Saturday that my dad had taken a turn for the worse. So she was really, really glad that I was coming. And it was hard. It was really hard to see my dad in the more declined state that he was now in. And he could hardly talk. He could talk and he could communicate a little, but it was much declined, and it was really difficult to see him that way. And my brother was there and his family, and there was a moment where my dad told a little bit of a funny story, that my brother was like, "Hey, Dad, how did that story go?" And my dad, for about 30 seconds talked about this funny thing that had happened at a restaurant one time, and I think that was the last story I heard him tell. And let me just say that my dad was a storyteller. He was a funny guy, and he was really great at telling stories, and this was a funny story. And I felt like after my brother left that day, that night, it just seemed like there was an even deeper decline, let's say, that, he was talking less, if at all. And my daughter, Chris, was planning to come the next day with her boyfriend, the guy, the guy who is the guy. He's the guy that she's gonna marry. Everybody knows it. I'm just gonna say it. Everybody knows it. They know it. Everybody's talking about it. It's gonna happen. Um, but at the moment, they're not even engaged yet, but she knows he's the guy. He knows she's the girl. And my daughter really wanted my dad to meet him, and it just hadn't happened yet. And she lives in Sacramento, so she is a similar amount away, a little bit further away from them than I am. And so, I had told her, if you wanna come down and see papa and bring TJ with you, you better go. You better come and see him. And so they were planning to come on Monday. And I had to, on Monday morning, let her know, you need to prepare yourself. He may not be able to engage with you. He may not be able to communicate with you, and just prepare yourself for that, you know? And I so badly wanted that for her though. And so I texted my here's where God hug number 2 is gonna come. And so I texted my pastor's wife, and I just thought, if I could ask her to pray for one thing, what would it be? And it's like, it's this. I want a miracle. I want my daughter to have some sort of a moment with my dad where he's cognitive and they can have a moment, you know, he can say something to her and they have a moment, right? Where he knows she's there and they can have this moment. And so I asked my pastor's wife, Susan, if she would pray for that. And she said, absolutely. And so as the afternoon went on, I a couple of times had mentioned to my dad the night before, and I think early that morning, and I'd say, Papa, remember that Chris and TJ are coming today. And he'd say, who? And I'd say, "Carissa." She likes to go by Chris, and, but he doesn't really know her as that, and so I said, "Carissa and her boyfriend, remember they're coming, and she's gonna introduce you to him. You're gonna finally meet the guy." And, I had reminded him of that a couple of times. Well, you know, by the time she came, I just didn't know what was gonna happen, but she walked in, and I walked up to the bed, and I said, "Papa, Carissa's here, and let me just tell you how he lit up and smiled and put his hands out, and she leaned in and gave him a hug, and, oh, it was just the best. That was the biggest reaction I'd seen out of him since I'd been there the day before, and he just smiled and gave her that hug, and he says, "Where's the guy?" He was able to articulate the words, "Where's the guy?" He knew the guy was coming. He knew TJ was coming to meet him, and he's ready to meet the guy. God hug number 3, and that was a big one. That was a big one. I was just so blessed. I got pictures, I got video, I got you know, it was just amazing. And then they visited and were there for a few hours and, just chatting and hanging out with him, and he barely interacted during any of that time. He would start to say something, and you couldn't understand what he was saying, or if you could understand what he was saying, it didn't really make sense, you know? So I knew that that moment, he had clarity, and it was a God thing. It was just a God thing. So God hug number 3. Yay, God. The next one um, that night, just like it felt like after my brother's family had left, on Sunday, that there seemed to be more of a decline that evening, and then the next day my daughter came, and then it seemed like after that there was yet another decline. So at some point that night, I just remember leaning over to him and just letting him know, "Daddy, you can go see Jesus anytime you're ready. We're gonna take care of mom. You just go see Jesus anytime you're ready." And I made a date with him. I made a date with him in heaven to go ride our flying horses together because that's a thing. That's a thing. I don't know. There's flying horses in the Bible. I believe there's flying horses in heaven because they talk about them in the Bible. And so I'm going to have a flying horse that I ride. And my dad, when he was a kid, he had dreams about riding a white flying horse. And so I told him we have a date. We're gonna get together in heaven and we're gonna go ride our flying horses together. And so I was basically, you know, releasing him and like, you go whenever you feel like you're ready to go. Well, then after that, things kept evolving. And then my other daughter calls, Shayla, and she's saying she wants to come see Papa. She had just been in Nashville the week before, so there was no way that she could come any earlier if she wanted to. But now she's asking if they can come. And literally, she was asking me this like 5 or 10 minutes after my mom had made it very clear that she didn't want anyone else coming because she just wanted to protect my dad. She didn't want anyone else seeing him in the condition that he was in. And so let's just say there was prayer and there was just, Lord, if it's meant to be, she'll come. If it's not, then she won't. It wasn't just a simple, yes, you're come. But in the end, she was able to come, her and her husband and the 2 little darlings, my little Claire Bear and Katie Jojo were able to come and they drove all day to get there and didn't arrive until about 8:15. So they came in. My mom actually got to meet the baby, Katie Jo, for the first time ever. She was not even a year old, and my mom just had never met her yet, and so my mom got to meet her, and we all ended up going in the living room with my dad, and my little Claire, I ended up getting out the little piano. My mom has a little kid's piano, like a little kid's grand piano, and Claire, was kind of playing on it a little bit at first, but then I start singing one of her favorite songs. Wheels on the bus go round and round, round and round, and she immediately lights up and starts playing the keyboard with it, and so she's playing it, and we're singing it together, and she's playing the song, and then she does another one. We did Wheels on the Bus, we did the Itsy Bitsy Spider, um, we did a few songs, for everybody, and during all of that, little Katie Jo's crawling around. I have video of her crawling around and near my dad and my daughter holding his hand while she's talking to my mom, and we're all having family time around my dad. The little ones are there bringing joy. I have a video of my mom is smiling and watching Claire play piano and smiling at Katie Joe, and it's a good family time together, and it was during that time that my dad passed. About 30 minutes after my daughter arrived and we were all in the living room having this family time. It wasn't just me and my mom because before that, it was just me and my mom. And right before they arrived, me and my mom had been in the other room watching a movie. And so he could have gone at any of those other times when we either weren't even in the room or we were in the room, but it was just us. And let me just tell you how I cannot imagine being there, just me and my mom in that moment. The fact that my daughter was there and her husband Danny and those little ones, it was a massive God hug. And later, both Shayla and Danny told me that, well, they wanted to come for Shayla to see her grandfather and say her goodbyes, that they both felt like they were supposed to be there and that he might pass while they were there. And they were only there for a little while. Their plan was to drive there, visit with us, and then get back in the car and drive all night, basically, and go home. But they were there. And I just can't even tell you what a blessing. What a blessing to have my daughter there to hug me. What a blessing to have Danny there, who was just like Mr. Do anything you want me to do guy. He called the mortuary for us. He jumped in the car and went to the gate to help my brother get in when my brother got there and couldn't get through the gate. And, the little things that I could have done all the things, but I'm so glad I didn't have to. Instead, I got to just be with my mom and be with Shayla. And there was this moment where I was with my mom. You might call this another God hug. I wasn't going to number this one. But while I'm sitting there with my mom near my dad, and we're waiting for the nurse to arrive. We'd called hospice, and it's just my mom and I. And, I'm consoling her and we're saying whatever is we're saying. Um, well, Danny had just been there saying how he was read some scripture. He read a scripture to her about Psalm 23, the last verse of Psalm 23, which I can't think of what it is right now. We will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Is that what it is? Yeah, that one. And he's like, Papa's up singing with the angels right now. And my mom says, oh, they wouldn't let him in the choir. He's not in the choir. So my mom was actually cracking a joke not that long after. Not to say that she wasn't in the depths because 65 years, this couple, 65 years they were together and they had the most special relationship. Um, but the fact that she could even say something, humorous in any way, just let you know that Jesus was with her. Jesus had her. And shortly after that, little Claire. So my daughter had taken Claire and Katie into the back bedroom to get them, away while all of this is going on and to keep things quiet. But Claire comes out and she hands us this little um, sticky note that had little different color sticky note squares on top of it. And I said, "Oh, well, thank," she hands it to my mom, I think, and I'm like, "Well, okay, thank you," and like, "Oh, she's giving us a little bit of artwork," and then she walks away, and then she came back and gave us another one that was shaped a little bit differently, and she later on, I mentioned to Shayla, I said, "Yeah, Claire came and gave me and Nini, um, the little pieces of artwork," and she's like, "Oh, that was pizza." She came and she was making pizzas with the little with the little sticky notes and the scissors and the sticking them with the glue. Um, so it was like even just that was just a little ray of sunshine in the midst of grief, a little bit of joy from a little one in the midst of grief. And it was just the best. And I remember being on the phone at one point with one of my best friends, telling her what had happened. And I'm standing in the kitchen. She says, and as I tell her what's happening, she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, blah, blah, blah." She's like, "How are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, right now I'm holding a baby, and so that's good." And she's like, "Oh, that's so good." And it's just, family. When you're going through a thing, people, you need your people around you, right? I had my people. I had my little Katie and I had my little Claire. And okay, so here's another fun story. Are you ready? This is a really good one. This is a good one. They're all good ones, but this is a good one. So at one point, my daughter Shayla had taken Claire to the bathroom, and the doorbell rings because the nurse is there. And Claire's all, "What? What's that? What's that? What's that noise?" And Shayla, who had already prepared Claire before they got there, that Papa's really sick and Papa's he's gonna go be with Jesus soon. So when the doorbell rang and Claire's wondering who it is, what's going on, and Shayla says, "Well, there's somebody at the door. There's somebody at the door. They're here for Papa." And Claire says, "Is it Jesus?" Oh my goodness. Claire's wondering if Jesus is standing at the door, knocking, ringing the doorbell. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. It's just too much. It's just too much. And so Shayla says, "No, he's already with Jesus." And Claire's all, "Oh, I love Jesus." And oh my goodness. Oh, I just can't handle it. It's just so sweet. And so that was just another special thing. So there was just, the care. That was what I'm calling God hug number 5. But there was the logistical stuff that Danny was there for, the hugs that I got from my daughter, the joy of the little ones being there, which you might think that having little ones around during a time like that would be the last thing you'd want, but it was the best thing in this case. And it just was so God. It was so God. Them even getting there and being there in that short window of time, it was God. It was God. So the next day, my brother came that night. He ended up spending the night, of course, and the next day we went and we made some arrangements. And let me tell you, we made some arrangements. We got everything all figured out. I called my friend and she's like, "I can't believe you got all that stuff done. Like you got all these things figured out." And I was like, "I know. That's how God does right now. He just keeps doing the things and he helped us figure out all these logistics and God God was with us. God walked with us, and beyond that, I could tell stories going into Christmas. I could tell more stories about how my mom and how great she's doing, and it's just blowing my mind how well she's doing. We were all really worried about her, but God has got her. Her neighbor across the street, who lost her husband like a few years ago, is still wallowing in grief more than my mom, who just lost her husband uh, 2 month and a half ago, because my mom has Jesus, and her neighbor doesn't wanna hear about Jesus, and she doesn't get it. She just doesn't get it, and so my mom was walking in the peace that passes understanding, and she just keeps remembering that she's gonna see him soon, and it's all gonna be okay. It's all good. So, whatever tough time that you might be either going through right now or will go through in the future, because we will all go through the things, right? We will all experience loss. We will all experience severely challenging times. Lean into grace. Know that God has got you, that His grace is sufficient for you. Lean into His peace that truly passes understanding. Let Him carry you and lead you. Watch for the God hugs. Watch for ways that He intervenes and shows up. And I could go on with more God hug stories because there were many. There were many. I just told you the main highlights, the ones that were most special and meaningful to me, but there were many more, including how special and amazing his memorial service, where at least 6 people were saved that we know of. Because my dad was an evangelist, there was no way that he was gonna let there be a memorial service without an altar call, and there was one, and we're aware of at least 6 people coming to know the Lord. And, oh, my dad, I know, was jumping for joy in heaven when that was happening. And even my friend's husband, who had never met my dad before, afterwards, he's like, "I've never been to a memorial like this before." He's like, "When I die, I want you doing my altar call, and I want Dawn to look like your mom looked during that service where I watched her and she's watching them talk about your dad and she's just glowing, she's just smiling, you know? And it's like, oh, that's just the best, you know? Oh, so God is good. God is good all the time. All the time, God is good. And my dad did live a good and full life, and that does bring me peace. The fact that I know that I'm going to see him again in heaven and we're going to ride on our flying horses, that brings me joy and it brings me peace. And it helps me get through the tough times. And by the way, I'm wearing my daddy's shirt. Now off you go, girl. Trust that God is with you to carry you through any challenging time that you may face.